Hey, good morning. Can you raise your right hand? You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in the proceedings now before the court to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
State your name, please, ma'am.
McClendon Garrett. That's
All right.
McClendon
All right, thank you very much, ma'am. You can have a seat. Now, Ms. Garrett, I'm going to refer to you as your professional title, Dr. Garrett, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you please explain to the jury how you're currently employed?
I work for the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities.
And what do you do for, well, tell the jury a little bit about what the Department of Behavioral Health and Disabilities is.
So it's an overall department in Georgia. Oh,
Oh,
sorry about
I
that.
have the sound was not on.
sorry.
It is the department in Georgia that oversees mental health services. It covers a variety of things like outpatient services, hospitals, and also the part that I'm involved in is forensic services. So my job is to go in and do court-ordered mental health evaluations.
And those court-ordered mental health evaluations, are those typically for defendants that are facing criminal charges in the jury?
They are all for defendants who are facing criminal charges.
Typically, how long have you worked at DBHDD?
For about 8 years.
And was that your first job out of school?
It was.
In psychology, I guess I should be specific.
Yes, it was my first psychological job.
Okay, we'll get to that in a few minutes. And what did you do, or what have you also done while you've been working with DBHDD?
I have a private practice on the side, but I can't do any state court or superior court cases in Georgia for conflict of interest, so I do federal cases.
Okay, and those federal cases that you handle, are those similar to the ones you handle with your work as DBHDD?
Typically, they're a little different. In those cases, I'm usually doing mitigation evaluations. That's looking at what kind of psychological factors were involved in the person's background that may have influenced their behaviors. So it's not about whether they were competent or whether they were insane, but whether there's any psychological factors that should be considered at sentencing.
Okay, so not specific responsibility evaluations or competency evaluations as you conduct?
Not
in
as
this case?
frequently.
Okay, but have you had a chance to do some of those
I've
in
done
the
some
federal system?
competency evaluations, but I haven't done any criminal responsibility evaluations in federal court.
Okay, and do you have any other work that you do in the field of psychology?
Not at this time.
Okay, all right.
I did do police fitness for duty type evaluations,
Okay, you did do that previously, but not doing that
but I'm
currently.
not doing it any longer.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about your educational background, if you may.
I got my undergraduate degree in psychology from Duke back in 1998. Then I went to law school at the University of Arizona. I graduated from law school in 2003 and came back to Georgia and practiced law here in Georgia for about 8 years before returning to graduate school out in Oregon at Pacific University, where I got a master's and a doctorate PsyD in clinical and forensic psychology in 2016.
So you're telling this jury that after 6 years of practicing law, you did not want to continue doing that?
I did not.
Okay. You might have to explain that to the rest of us here. When you, how long did it take you to get your, it's a PsyD, is that what it's referred
It's a
to?
doctoral degree in psychology.
Okay. And how long did it take you to obtain that degree?
I had 4 years of coursework and then a year of practicum that I did after I completed the coursework. That was a full-time placement at Georgia Regional Hospital, Atlanta. And then I went and did a full year of internship that specialized in forensics at a hospital in Maryland called Springfield Hospital Center. After I completed that, I was able to get my degree, and then I spent another year there doing a postdoctoral degree education, also specifically in forensics. So I spent 2 years total at Springfield Hospital Center.
Okay. And is that similar to a medical doctor that works in the emergency room that has residencies and
Yeah,
things like that?
so it's mandatory. The internship is mandatory for the degree. The postdoc is not mandatory, but it's recommended, especially if you want to go into a specialty area like forensics.
And you did that because that's what you wanted to do, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any current license or certifications that you hold as a psychologist?
I'm licensed to practice psychology in the state of Georgia.
Okay, and that covers both clinical settings and forensic settings?
It's a general license, yeah.
Okay. And how long have you had that license?
Since 2017.
And do you have any annual requirements to retain your license, testing, or?
We don't have any testing requirements. We do have annual requirements. Well, actually, it's every other year we have to have 40 hours of continuing education. So that's done through conferences, webinars, consultation meetings, things like that.
Okay, and you are up to date on all of your annual training requirements?
I am. We just renewed in December.
Okay.
Well, it's renewed in December, but I've already done it.
Okay. Can you explain to the jury what psychology is?
Psychology generally is just sort of the study of the mind.
And what type of, is there any type of diagnostic testing that you do when you are evaluating an individual?
There's a variety of different diagnostics that people can do. It really depends on the specific situation. So if you have a more specific question, I would answer that.
So I was going to ask you a little about the difference between clinical psychology and forensic psychology. So what do you do in a clinical psychological setting?
In a clinical psychological setting, you would, at a minimum, have a clinical interview, which is where you gather information about the person's background, what kinds of things have happened to them, what kinds of things they've done, their education, and their symptom presentation if they have any symptoms. If there are specific symptoms you're concerned about or specific things they're worried about, like some people want to get an assessment of their cognitive function or some people want to get a diagnosis. So then there are specific tests that can be used for each of those different kinds of questions, and you tailor what tests you're using based on what their concern is, what the referral question is.
And how does that compare or contrast to the area of forensic psychology?
In that way, it's pretty similar. You still are tailoring everything to what the specific referral question is. The biggest difference are sort of in relational issues. If you're a clinical psychologist, you're there for that person. You're trying to help that person. You're trying to be their support. And so you have a different view. They're your client. You believe what they say. You don't have any real reason to question what they're telling you because they're coming to you for help. In a forensic category, they're not your client. The person that you're interviewing is not your client. Usually the person is an attorney or a judge or somebody else other than the person who is speaking to you. And because they have court cases typically or things like that they have to deal with, you have to be more mindful of the fact that they may have an agenda. So you're not taking everything that they say as gospel. You don't just accept the things that you say. You do a lot more on the lines of looking at records and looking at other things to try and to see if what they say is consistent with what has been seen by other people.
Is it fair to say that a clinical psychologist is more in the lines of a therapist? Someone
Yes.
that helps someone through their specific diagnosis?
Yes, that's correct.
And as a forensic psychologist, you are taking the role more as an objective observer, considering not only what that person tells you, correct, but what also you might look at as other collateral sources in evaluating the circumstances of what happened.
That's correct. And we don't do any therapy at all. It would be unfair to the person you're interviewing to pretend like you're a therapist. So we make it very clear up front, we're not your therapist, we're independent. Because if they start believing that you're their therapist, they will interact with you in a different way, and they may come to believe that you're on their side and tell you things that they wouldn't otherwise tell you, and that's not fair. So our job is to be independent and neutral and just reach the best conclusion we can.
And ma'am, are you a member of any professional organizations in your area of psychology?
The sort of standard ones, the American Psychological Association and the Georgia Psychological Association.
Okay. And what about any articles or studies? Have you been involved in publishing anything in these areas?
Not really. I'm more of a hands-on practitioner than a researcher. I I have done some presentations on violence, risk, and aggression, and on grooming behaviors. When I talk about grooming, we did a presentation on how people will, how sort of predators will bring in, like, it's usually considered in sex crimes where people will bring in girls to be prostitutes, and they groom them to that process. So there's a process of treating them very kindly and helping them out and being their savior, and then exerting control and putting them on the streets and making them do things. So we did I did a presentation for the American Association of Forensic Psychologists that was based on research about grooming like that.
Okay. And how about testifying in court? I assume you've testified in court before, is that right?
I have.
How many times do you believe you've testified?
Not many. Maybe 50?
Okay. Do you have any recollection of the number of times you've testified either for the state or for the defense in a case?
It would be roughly 50-50.
Okay. And each of those times that you have testified, have you been tendered as an expert in the field of either clinical psychology or forensic psychology?
I have.
Okay. Judge, at this time, I'm going to move to tender Dr. Garrett as an expert in the areas of forensic psychology, clinical psychology specifically, and I guess specifically on conducting and completing competency and criminal responsibility evaluations.
Any objection? No objection. She's qualified.
All right, so you talked a little bit about a forensic psychology, the difference between clinical and forensic psychology generally. What are the specific steps that you go through when you generally conduct a forensic psychological examination like the ones you would have conducted here?
So I will go and meet the person wherever they are, in the detention center or a hospital or their attorney's office, wherever, and conduct a clinical interview. Spend a lot of time speaking to them about their background, about their mental health symptoms, and about how they're doing at the time of the evaluation. So you're trying to get sort of a full picture of the person from, I mean, we start out with where were you born, all the way up to how are you doing today? And then depending on what the referral question is, there would be other sections. So if I were doing a competency evaluation, I would then ask them questions about their understanding of what happens in court, their ability to describe their case, their ability to think clearly about what their legal options are, and their ability to communicate that information to their attorney.
When you, I guess let me take you one step back before you go see them. You receive some sort of document or referral for this process, I assume?
We get a court order and a referral, and hopefully at least a police report, indictments, warrants, things like that.
Do you recall in this case who you received the referral from?
I believe the referral came from the state's attorney's office.
Okay, do you remember if it was from Ms. Gropper herself?
I believe
the
so.
District attorney, assistant district attorney, okay. Do you recall when you received that in this case?
It was in 2022.
Do you have your report available to
I
you?
do.
Okay. Can you look on page 1 and see when you received that?
I can tell you when the order was written, but that's not when I get them.
Sure.
It goes through a whole process. But the order was dated September 30th, 2021.
And then you received it, or your office, I guess,
Our offices
DBHDD
received it in May of 2022.
Okay, and I assume there's a process through DBHDD when they get it, and then they assign it to
They assign it to a
psychologist.
region, and then the region assigns it to a psychologist.
Okay, so you are assigned to a specific region within DBHDD for these types of evaluations?
I'm not personally, but
Okay.
most people are. I work for the state office, which means I'm a floater. They send me where they need evaluators.
Okay.
So I was working up here in this area for a while. Now I'm over in the east. I move around. I'm all over the state.
Okay, all right. So when you get a referral form, does that generally come with, you said you hoped you get like an indictment or a police report, but does that referral form come with all of that information, or do you have to reach out to the referring office to obtain those documents?
It's supposed to come with all of that. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay. Do you recall in this particular case when you got the file that you started working from, what documents you had at that time?
I don't specifically recall what came originally. I believe I got the investigative summary up front, and an evaluation from a privately retained psychologist. And probably an indictment. I don't remember specifically what came.
Okay. Your report, you did two different reports in this case, is that right?
That's correct.
You did a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation, right?
Yes, sir.
And I was going to deal with the difference in that in just a minute. You touched on it a little bit. What is the difference between a competency evaluation and a criminal responsibility evaluation?
So a competency evaluation is how somebody's doing right at the time you do the evaluation. It's sort of a slice in time. Are they currently able to understand what's happening in court and able to work with their attorney in their own defense? A criminal responsibility evaluation is how the person was doing at the time of the alleged crime. So that answer could be very different depending on how much time has passed. So we have to look back and see what was going on in their life at the time of the crime.
So in this case, the criminal responsibility piece is looking at Ms. Driver around the December 8, 2020 timeframe, correct?
Correct.
And the competency evaluation is looking at her at the time that you conduct that actual evaluation,
That's correct.
because that is geared towards her case moving forward and whether she can be an assistance with that case and understands what she's going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, you did the competency evaluation. You found her to be competent to stand trial, ultimately, right? That's not an issue that you're talking about today.
That's correct.
Yeah. When you did that competency evaluation, how long did you spend with her when you conducted that initial interview?
About an hour and 45 minutes.
Okay.
Actually, sorry, at that time it was 2 hours and 35
Yeah.
minutes.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to make sure we were correct. That was in August of 2022. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So that was 2 hours and 35 minutes at the Cherokee County Detention Center with Ms. Driver.
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall in that report, do you have the competency report with you as well?
I do.
I think this is the same for both evaluations, but you listed sources of information that you had in that evaluation. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
And you listed several things, including Ms. Driver's, some records from Ms. Driver at the jail, hospital, medical records from her at the jail, correct?
That's correct.
Reviewed her Wellstar Kennestone Hospital records as well.
I did.
Specifically, some handwritten notes that she had made during the course of that stay at the hospital. Is that fair?
That's correct.
You said you had the indictment, summary report from the City of Canton Police regarding their investigation. And you had a evaluation that had been conducted by a privately retained expert, in this case, Dr. Roberta Ballard, too. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And you had the opportunity, I presume, to review all of those things before you went and saw Ms. Driver?
Some things I reviewed before and some things I reviewed after.
Okay.
Like to get her jail records, I had to get her to sign a release of information, so I got that information after.
Okay. Okay. So when you went and met with her in August, she signed a release form for you to obtain the records from the jail.
That's correct.
And you reviewed those after your evaluation?
But before I wrote the report. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Did you ever reach out to myself or Ms. Trethewey to obtain any additional information that you would need for your evaluation of Ms. Driver on either incident?
I don't recall reaching out to counsel.
Okay. So tell me specifically, when you meet with Ms. Driver, how do you go about discussing these issues with her? I assume there's some sort of rapport you're trying to establish with her so she can be honest with you. Is that fair?
There's sort of we call it sort of a forensic rapport.
Okay.
There's, we're not overly friendly, but we're obviously, accepting and empathetic. we always start with an advisement of what their rights are. We let them know that it's not confidential. We let them know that they do not have to answer our questions, that they have the right to consult with their attorney, and that anything that they tell us can be included in a report, and we might have to come to court and testify, and that the information can be used at sentencing.
And Ms. Driver had already been through an evaluation with a privately retained psychologist that you were aware of, right?
That's my understanding.
So did she express to you that she understood what this process was going to be like?
She did.
Okay. She didn't have any issues communicating with you about any of the questions you were asking her?
She did not.
So are there any specific types of tests that you do while you're conducting this evaluation, or is it really just talking to her about her experience?
Sometimes there's testing done. I did not do any testing in this case. I spoke with her. I did a clinical interview. I did a competency interview, and then when I went back, I did a criminal responsibility interview.
Would the testing be done more if you believe that there were cognitive issues with Ms. Driver?
If there's cognitive issues, if there's specific concerns that they might be feigning or exaggerating symptoms, if there's comprehension issues, yeah.
Okay.
we would
You did not
testing.
have any concerns about any of those issues as it related to Ms. Driver?
I did not.
Okay. So when you talked to her, do you recall what the first set of topics were about this particular case with Ms. Driver?
About the case or about just in first topics covered in the interview?
Your interview.
Background information.
Okay. And what did you learn about Ms. Driver's background?
I learned that she had sort of an unstable early childhood, that her family moved around and she felt like they were kind of cold, but that she also left the family several times. She left and moved in with boys. She even left the state and moved in with a boy. She had some suicidal ideation early on, some self-injurious behavior, and we're talking about like cutting. She would cut her arms. She, I think, attempted an overdose on sleeping pills. She also abused substances. She started at a young age using marijuana and then cocaine and experimenting with some other drugs as well.
Did you ask her if she had ever been evaluated or diagnosed as a teenager or earlier on in her childhood?
She stated that when she was younger, she did get some treatment. She saw a doctor. She wasn't sure if it was like her pediatrician or a psychiatrist, but that she did see a doctor who prescribed her some antidepressants early on, but she did not take them.
Okay. And you're not aware of any records or evaluation reports that you've ever seen about her?
I have not seen any documentation of that.
Okay. And after discussing her background, what would your next topic of discussion generally be with an evaluation?
In the competency evaluation, the next step would be to talk to her, well, in both of them, the next step would be to talk to her about her current mental status, how she was doing at the time of the interview.
Okay, so let's skip off the competency evaluation piece. Let's just focus on the criminal responsibility.
So we would do that, the mental status in both evaluations.
Okay. Was there when do you recall doing the second interview with her regarding the criminal responsibility
It was
piece?
about a month later in September of 2022.
And was there a difference in Ms. Driver's personality when she met with you both in August and September?
In August, she was upbeat. She described herself as being excited. She talked about not really sleeping and having a lot of projects she was working on in the jail. She said she was annoying her roommates by singing and dancing and doing gymnastics. So she was really very upbeat the first time I spoke to her. When I returned a month later, she showed signs that she had been crying before she came into the meeting. She was disheveled. Her hair wasn't done. Her jail clothing was disheveled, and she expressed sadness and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness.
Are those symptoms, or those signs of things that you saw from her just in her personality to you, are they things that you would pick up on in the nature of your evaluation of her?
That's pretty much the purpose of the mental status exam, is to look for things like that, because they can show sadness and feelings of hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of being persecuted, not being sleeping too much or sleeping too little, changes in appetite, changes in activity level, change in the rate at which people speak, the rate at which they move. All of that can be suggestive of a depressed state, of being in an episode of depression. And then the other end, the being excited, not sleeping at all, having a lot of projects, really being in, like, a lot of people really love being that way because they get things done. They have a lot of things that they can do, and they have a lot of energy, and they don't feel like they need to sleep, so they'll stay up for days on end without getting any sleep, and that would be a sign of mania or hypomania, which is sort of a subclinical level of mania.
Okay. Part of the sources that you were reviewing in this case, including her records from the jail, is that fair?
Yes.
And those records included evidence regarding medication that she was taking?
That's correct.
Can you describe the medication that she was on while she was in the jail at that point in time? Or even from when she came into the jail until you met with her?
So they actually changed her medications a lot. They tried different things, and she frequently said she didn't want to be taking any medications at all, and she would refuse the medication. So the medications were adjusted and changed and moved around a lot. When she first came in, she was taking medications to address mood, she was taking medications to address anxiety, and she was taking medications to address symptoms of psychosis, like hearing things, seeing things that aren't really there, disorganized thoughts, things like that.
Can you describe specifically the medication that she was on? Do you recall?
Can I refer to my notes?
Absolutely, yes.
So when she first came in, she was exhibiting signs of depressed mood, hopelessness, suicidal ideation, and labile affect, which is how you present your mood, the outward expressions of emotion, and labile means that it moves up and down. So she had shifting moods, shifting emotions. So they were looking at a possible unspecified psychosis according to the records. So she was prescribed Prozac, which is an antidepressant, Visceral, which is actually an antihistamine, but it's given for anxiety, and Zyprexa, which is an antipsychotic.
And that is, you said that was when she first initially was in the jail. Were those symptoms that she was being observed with in the jail, were they consistent with the, I guess, diagnosis or impressions that the medical staff at Kennestone had of her when she was at the hospital?
So my medical records, I believe, from Kennestone were incomplete.
Okay.
I only had about 118 pages from Kennestone Hospital, and there was only one psychiatric report in that file that I had.
Okay.
And at the time of that evaluation, she was sedated and did not get any information.
Okay, so that didn't really give you any information.
So I didn't
at all.
really have any information about her mental health from the hospital. So
Okay.
I started from the jail.
And so from the initial arrival at the jail and the description you just gave of her mood and her conditions that she was showing, how did that change over the course of the next months while she was incarcerated?
She continued to express a lot of paranoid ideation, thinking that people are out to get her, out to harm her, talking about her behind her back. She also expressed a lot of what we call delusions of reference, which is when you see something that's sort of innocuous and you interpret it as having some special meaning to you. So a lot of people will say, oh, I was getting a message from the TV or the radio, like it was talking directly to me. Not that I was hearing what they were saying, but there was something underlying it, a coded message that was just for them. Other people will think that they're getting instructions from people's facial expressions, body language, objects, and things like that. So she was describing getting a lot of coded messages from sounds she heard, things that facial expressions of people in the jail, that she was doing something wrong, that she shouldn't be there, things like that.
those reports that you're referencing, those are things that she was telling you about in the course of your evaluation too, is that right?
Those are things she told to the jail staff, that the jail staff documented in their records, and she also told me very similar things.
Okay. And in conducting your evaluation, that is one of the things that you are trying to look at in terms of the consistency of what she is telling, not just yourself, but other people that she's interacting with. Is that fair?
Yes, consistency, and especially if there's if it's detailed. So you look at, if somebody gives something really vague and then it changes, that is something that we are concerned that they might be making it up because they can't remember more detailed things to share over the time, so that it's very vague. And if they do try to use something that's detailed, then the details might change over time. So we look for both of those things.
Okay. And for an example, you noted this in your report that that she said to you that people are communicating with me through their body language and I'm not supposed to be here. Is that one of the things you recall her saying to you directly?
Yes, she said that in terms of how she was feeling in the jail, but she also said that she had felt those things before as well.
Okay. Before the incident date?
That's correct.
Okay. Did she talk to you about how long she had been feeling those paranoias, those concerns about how she was seeing and hearing things?
She told me that that actually started a long time ago when she was a teenager, and that she was feeling sort of a more generalized paranoia. She didn't give me details about what kind of thoughts she had as a teenager in terms of the paranoia. She also talked about having sort of magical thinking, which is when it's sort of the opposite of delusions of reference. The magical thinking is when you think that there's something about you that can control the world, even though there's no real connection. So she talked about being able to read minds and things like that and having a spiritual awakening. And that occurred prior to when she met her husband, but while she was using illicit substances as a teenager. And then she went off illicit substances, and I don't know whether she continued to experience delusions in between going off and when this occurred, but she said that the symptoms became particularly bad approximately 2 to 3 months before the alleged crime.
And why was that?
I think there was sort of a confluence of events. I think she started to feel worse. She suggested that she was starting to sort of question some of the things that she was being taught, and started to feel a little bit paranoid and was starting to experience those delusions of references. She was starting to see things and making them think that she needed to hurt herself, that she wasn't supposed to be in the universe, she wasn't supposed to be in the world. And that she reached out to her family, the family she was living with, and wasn't able to get help and was instead given CBD oil, and that once she started taking the CBD oil, that there was a big jump. She felt like it was very potent. That's how she felt. And that her paranoia and delusions of reference and magical thinking all increased sort of significantly and sharply after starting to take that drug.
Okay. Now, I'm going to kind of get to the CBD specifically. One of the things that you diagnosed her with was cannabis use disorder. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And is that based on the CBD that she was taking?
Yes, she believed that it had THC. Now I have no idea what was in the cannabis oil she was taking.
Right.
But she believed that it was intoxicating, and she continued to take it, and it was causing her significant distress.
Did she explain to you that the CBD that she was using was being given to her by the husband in her life, Mr. Ben Michael?
She did. She indicated that she had ordered some online, but that Mr. Ben Michael, I've been calling him Mr. Joyce, so I'll try and whatever is most consistent.
We've got 3 different names for him,
yeah, so
we're
it's
trying
hard to keep up.
clear.
But she said that he did not want her to use the commercial one, so he brought her one that was produced by a friend or brought to him by a friend. She didn't really know the source.
Okay. So what she was using was one that had been, what she told you she'd been using was one that had been provided by a third party, not the stuff that she ordered.
Correct.
Okay. Is it fair, Dr. Garrett, that the use of substances, illicit substances specifically, can influence or increase someone's paranoia and delusions?
Yes. And even illicit and even legal drugs can do that. Anything that has sort of an intoxicating effect can negatively impact somebody's symptoms. So if you have, and cannabis is sort of well known for being something that causes people who don't have mental illness to have some level of paranoia. And so the addition of cannabis to somebody who has a pre-existing paranoia can increase, it can sort of ratchet that up and make that worse.
And your belief that the symptoms that she was reflecting to you in her earlier years or teenage years, were those caused by her mental health situation, or were those caused more by drug use?
It's difficult to say.
Okay.
It was a long time ago, so self-report is not hugely reliable for things that happened that long ago. But the way it usually works is either a substance can trigger an underlying mental health condition, can cause a new mental health condition, or can be a way of trying to medicate a condition that already exists. So those are the most common ways that we see, early mental health and substance use interact.
Okay.
Which one of those was at play in this case, I couldn't tell you for sure.
Now, you are familiar with the dynamic in which Ms. Driver was living during this incident that we're talking about in this case. Is that right?
Based on her descriptions.
Yes. Was that also information that you learned through other sources in this case?
There was some information included in witness statements given to the police that were summarized in the investigative summary.
Okay. And I don't want you to talk about anything that the specific people said, but you're aware she was living in a polygamous or polyamorous relationship with Mr. Ben Michael, right? There were multiple wives in their relationship. That's something that you were aware of.
Yes, she told me there was another woman before her, but that she left, and that she went with Mr. Ben Michael, and then 2 other women joined later.
Okay. Did she describe to you did Ms. Driver specifically describe to you the nature of how her relationship with Mr. Ben Michael was in the beginning and how it developed over the, about three years she was with him?
She described meeting him when she was 16 years old, sitting at a bus station, I believe, and that she found him charming and intelligent and engaging, and he gave her his contact information. And about a year later, when she was 17, she reached out to him, and he accepted her in, and they began a romantic relationship at that point when he was 38 or 39 years old.
Does the age discrepancy between Mr. Ben Michael and Ms. Driver at that time, did that cause you concern, or did that play into your consideration of her evaluation?
Yeah, it was one of several factors. Between her sort of unstable childhood, the sort of push and pull with her parents, returning to her parents, leaving her parents, things like that, her substance abuse, and her young age, all made her, in my view, particularly susceptible to wanting to be with somebody who's older and willing to take her in and protect her and things like that. So I felt like that may have been a factor in why she chose to join this group.
Okay. Did she describe to you the nature of the relationship she had with Mr. Ben Michael early on when they met?
A little bit, not a lot. She did indicate that he got her off all drugs, that she was supposed to be very clean and was not able to use drugs anymore, that she tried marijuana one time at a drug circle and got in quite a bit of trouble for it, and then never did any more again until a couple months before this incident. And that she basically described, him being a partner, that it was good, and that she believed the things he told her, and that she accepted the lifestyle.
And she accepted the lifestyle when the other 2 women came in to that group. Is that
That's my understanding. We didn't talk about that in any kind of detail. She did not express any dissatisfaction with their presence. She talked about them being there, but she didn't say anything positive or negative about it.
Okay. And at some point in time, they had a child. Mr. Ben Michael and Ms. Driver had a child together.
That's correct.
Hannah in the context of this case, right? Was Ms. Driver ever able to explain to you any difference in their relationship once the child became involved?
I think she started to become more concerned about having a normal life for her child once she had a child. She was concerned that there was no prenatal health care, that there was no birth certificate, that there was no Social Security, that there were no vaccines. And she started feeling, she described to me sort of feeling like she was concerned that her baby wouldn't get a normal life.
Okay. Stability is something that she was looking at? Is that fair?
It seemed that way.
Okay. You were aware that their living arrangement, they didn't maintain a set home.
She described them as nomadic.
Yes. Going back to the medication issue with Ms. Driver, your records that you reviewed while she was at the jail, you said that they tried her on different medications at various times. Is that common when trying to treat someone with mental health illnesses?
To a certain degree, there was more fluctuation in hers than I would normally expect to see. Whenever you give somebody a medication, you don't know, everybody responds to medications differently. So they start at a low level and they increase, and if there are side effects, they may try a different medication, and then they have to start over again at a low level and increase up to a therapeutic level. Symptoms may change, they may have to address different things as things go along, they may have to add a new medication in to address any kind of side effects. So there's always some adjustment. In Ms. Driver's case, there was more because she did not believe in taking medications and did not want to take medications. So she would get better, and as soon as she was better, she would say, well, I don't want medications, I don't need medications. And they would try to explain to her, well, the reason you're feeling better now is because you're on medications. But she didn't want to take them, so she was taking them sporadically and consistently, and they would lower the dosage to make it less impactful on her mental state. And then they would have to change it again because her symptoms would flare up. There would be a change in her symptoms after that.
Is that common generally for people that have mental health illnesses, have issues with them taking medication?
Yes.
Is it common for people with mental health issues to basically believe that they are okay? They don't recognize their own issues?
That's actually a symptom of schizophrenia. Yeah.
Right. And I guess more particularly so in a case for Ms. Driver, excuse me, who had a lifestyle leading up to this circumstance of not wanting to take pharmaceutical medication at all, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. And further than that, someone that is not taking medication consistently and refusing to cooperate with that treatment plan, that can further, I guess, delay the ability to get treatment for those particular illnesses. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay. And did you see that in Ms. Driver in this case?
There was some indication of that because whenever she would reduce her medications or go off her medications, her symptoms would become more evident. And she was on suicide watch several times for long periods of time. She had to be restrained because of self-harm behaviors. She put in strapped into a chair. They have a restraint chair that they can kind of roll around, you know? And they had to put her in one of those because she was hurting herself.
Okay. What ultimately did you diagnose Ms. Driver with in this case?
Schizoaffective disorder, borderline personality disorder, and the cannabis use.
And we talked a little bit about that. So let's focus more directly on the schizoaffective disorder. What is that? Can you describe that for the jury, please?
Schizoaffective disorder is, a lot of people know about schizophrenia. So it's schizophrenia plus mood. Schizophrenia is when somebody has thoughts that are different than other people. They may, or perceptions that are different from other people. So they may see things that aren't really there, or they may hear things that when there's nothing to hear. They may smell things that aren't there. They may feel things walking on their skin or feel things in their body. So those are hallucinations. They may have delusions, which are fixed false beliefs that persist even in the face of contrary evidence. And that's usually not just, these conspiracy theories are bound these days, right? Everybody's got a theory about things. Those you can see how they developed, you can see what they're based on. When you're talking about a delusion, it's something more than that. It's when there's really no other explanation for their belief other than that they have a mental illness. So a lot of times it takes the people are out to get me, people are out to harm me, or I have special powers. I can fly, I can see things, I'm smarter than everybody else. I spoke to one gentleman who was positive that he was the president of Mars. So that's the kind of thing that we're looking at with schizophrenia. Plus you also get disorganized thinking. So they may change subjects without any indication of why. They may start out talking about the sky is blue, and then when the sky is blue, the leaves are green, and then the leaves die, and you end up talking about death. There's like these very loose associations between what they talk about, or they kind of flow off onto some different track, and it's hard to get them back. So that's sort of the disorganized thinking portion of schizophrenia. So when it's schizoaffective disorder, you've got the hallucinations, delusions, and thought disorder, plus problems with your mood. Depression, mania, and sometimes both. Sometimes they go back and forth. Sometimes it's just one or the other.
And what about the borderline personality disorder? How does that play in?
Borderline personality disorder is sort of a lifetime thing. It's characterological. Oftentimes it's triggered by some sort of trauma or some sort of feeling of abandonment in early childhood. But it's a pattern of behavior that starts in adolescence and continues throughout their life, whether in school, at work, at home. It's a consistent part of who they are. And it involves things like unstable relationships. So like Ms. Driver talked about having sort of a push and pull with her parents. She'd go back to her parents, she'd leave her parents, she'd go back to her parents, leave her parents. That is sort of indicative of an unstable relationship. It's also an unstable sense of self. So you might one minute think, oh no, I'm a good person. I'm a great person. I do good things. And then the next minute you might think, I am horrible. I'm a terrible person. And they hold all of this sort of at the same time. So it's they call it a dialectic, where you try and hold these things, and that's sort of a big word, and I don't even know why I used it. But you try and hold all of this stuff inside, and it leads to aggravation, anger, impulsivity, and one of sort of the characteristics is sort of this need to hold on tightly to people in your life. They call it frantic efforts to avoid abandonment. And that's something that was even noted in the jail records when other people in jail when Ms. Driver started experiencing people at jail as sort of rejecting her or being critical of her, she would get suicidal and self-harming. That's that kind of thing we're looking at, where people will do whatever they can to keep people from leaving them. And so all of that sort of comes together to make a very unstable interaction both with themselves and with the world.
Now, in this particular case, were you aware that Ms. Driver had continued to have contact with Mr. Benyamin while she was in custody?
I had heard that occurred, yes.
Is that something that would be a consistent symptom of someone that has borderline personality disorder as you just described it?
Yes, in my opinion it is.
Okay. Would that be more particularly heightened in a situation like this, where she viewed him as the leader of this group, this cult type of religious foundational group?
That plus just sort of the general stress that was in her life, all of those can increase that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, these diagnoses that you made, they are based on actual psychological findings through medical journals. Is that accurate?
There's a criteria that has been set out in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual that lays out all of the well-researched and defined different kinds of disorders and what their specific criteria is to meet those.
And what are we up to now on the DSM-5?
The DSM-5-TR, the text revision.
Okay.
So it's right after 5.
All right. And those, I presume as a clinician or even as a forensic psychologist, you interview someone, you make notes of everything you see, and you go back to the DSM guidelines just to review and make sure, all right, do I think this person meets this particular diagnosis? Is that fair?
Yeah, there's sort of an interplay. You go and you know, we study the book, right? So we know generally what we can sort of, we'll get triggered when somebody says something or does something. We'll go, okay, that reminds me of X, Y, Z. So then you would ask them more questions because you want to see if it meets. And then you take everything back and yes, you pull up the diagnostic criteria and you walk through, does she meet? Because there's like a whole list of criteria, and they have to meet some of them, but not all of them, because nobody is the same. Everybody is different. And so you look at all of them and you see where do we have signs that she meets that criteria, and where is that supported by other sources as well.
Now, you have talked a little bit throughout your testimony about confirming that someone isn't making it up.
Yes.
I think in the medical parlance they call it malingering.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways. Malingering is one. That's an intentional fabrication of symptoms, or an intentional exaggeration of symptoms, specifically for the purpose of secondary gain. But we also have to be aware that not everybody's, secondary gain is hard to prove and hard to demonstrate. So you're also looking for just, are they exaggerating for whatever reason, because it's their personality to exaggerate? Are they exaggerating everything? So just because somebody is malingering or feigning or exaggerating one thing doesn't mean they don't have a mental illness, doesn't mean they aren't being honest about other things. So you really have to parse all of that out.
And you took steps in your evaluation to determine if you believed that she was either faking it or malingering or anything that would...
I didn't do any testing, but I did pay attention to that. That was something that I seriously considered.
Does that go back to the idea of her consistency with the statements she was giving you in both of your interviews you conducted?
Yes.
Is it also fair to say that you were able to evaluate that based on not only what she told you, but what she had told Dr. Ballard in the reports that she conducted?
I didn't look too carefully at what she told Dr. Ballard, so I couldn't testify about what she told Dr. Ballard, generally speaking, my recollection was that it was very consistent,
Okay.
And it was consistent with what was in the reports from the jail.
All right, so you had jail records that were indicating those same ideas and symptoms, correct?
Correct.
You had at least a report from Dr. Ballard which drew similar conclusions that you looked at and reviewed, right?
Yes.
And you obviously had your own evaluations that you conducted of her over 2 different periods of time.
Yes.
And you spent about 4 hours and 15 minutes by my calculation with her over the course of 2 times. Is that fair?
About that, yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that that's a fair time frame to spend with someone when conducting forensic evaluations such as this?
It's more than we usually do.
Okay. Okay. Can you explain, I think you talked about it a little bit, can you explain the delusional compulsions and what delusions are specifically?
So I talked about delusions a little bit already, but they are a fixed false belief that it's held even if you have evidence to the contrary, and is so unusual that it couldn't be justified, it couldn't be explained by any other reason other than there's something wrong with the way the person's thinking. A delusional compulsion is when a person, if their delusion had been real, then it would have justified their conduct.
Can you give us an example of a delusion generally that you see frequently in your line of work?
There's so many. A lot of them have to do with, I saw a gentleman who believed that his family members had been replaced with imposters, that they looked like his family members and they talked like his family members, but he actually believed that there were aliens inside there, like pod people, I guess. He believed that they had taken over his parents' appearance and bodies to harm him.
And what specifically in Ms. Driver's case can you point to as some examples of delusions that she was dealing with?
So she talked generally about paranoia that everybody was ganging up against her, everybody is talking about her, everybody is out to get her in some way. She talked about, on sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, sort of a grandiose delusion that she had special powers and special skills. And that started back when she was a teen, with believing that she could read minds and that people could read her mind and things like that. It continued with this sort of magical thinking that things that she did could impact the world. So if she, walked the right way, talked the right way, breathed the right way, then it would be good for the world. If she walked the wrong way, breathed the wrong way, talked the wrong way, that it could be bad for the world. And that is sort of a... She also talked about delusions of reference, which I also talked about before, thinking that somebody's facial expression, that they were giving them a specific message, and not like a "I don't like you" message, like, because when people glare at you, we all do that, right? But she's talking more about somebody would talk about death in a completely different context, and she interpreted that as they're telling me specifically that I have to kill myself. That kind of thing. She would see a knife just lying out in somebody's kitchen where it's supposed to be. And she would see that, and she would interpret that as, that's a sign that I need to kill myself. Kill myself and my baby, cut somebody, cut her throat, cut my throat. So she had a lot of that was going back at least a month or two before this actually happened.
And you were able to observe or identify those delusions based on what Ms. Driver was telling you, number one, right?
Yeah.
And also, you were seeing that from some collateral sources in this case based on statements made in the investigative summary from the police department.
That's correct. And she said it to the jail.
Yes. So, for example, if she was, like an example of a delusion to her could be a fellow inmate at the jail saying that her grandmother died, she could interpret as a statement to her that she needed to kill herself.
She could. That's not one of the ones she specifically mentioned. She mentioned being at a 12 Tribes event where they were talking or preaching about being accepting of death, and she interpreted that as the sign that it was time.
And are you aware that she went to a 12 Tribes event the morning of December
Yeah, that's the
8th?
one she was speaking
Yeah,
of.
she was specifically telling you about that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you described what delusions are and what delusional compulsion are. Did you believe that Ms. Driver was suffering from delusional compulsions during this time frame?
I believe she was experiencing delusions.
Okay. You were aware that she was reporting issues and evidence of domestic violence, is that right?
Yes, sir.
You were aware there was an incident about 10 days before the December 8th incident of report with law enforcement in North Carolina where she had a black eye? Were you aware of that?
I was aware that she had a black eye when she went to see her mother.
Yes. You saw the source in the information that you were provided that her mom reported the black eye to law enforcement.
I believe so. I don't have a specific memory, though. That's...
Okay. Are you aware that there was a time frame? Did Ms. Driver tell you about a time frame in which Mr. Ben Michael rather, took their child from her and had her away from her for a period of time?
She did.
Okay. Did she talk about how that affected her mental state? Did that add things to your evaluation with her?
She talked about that in terms of why she went back to him. That she had called her parents, texted with her parents, and asked them to come pick her and Hannah up, but that she used it from a phone that's monitored by Mr. Benjamin, and that he discovered those messages and came and took Hannah away from her before she could go. That her parents did come get her, but only got her. And that he was telling her that she would never see her daughter again if she didn't come back, so she returned back.
Okay. She talked to you about the nature of how she felt about her child, right?
A little bit, but not that much.
Did she tell you things about how she felt like she was downloading herself with Hannah when she breastfed?
She did. She talked about that she believed that she was downloading her sins or the bad parts about her into her child through breastfeeding. She also talked about pouring her sin into the child. And I believe there was a statement, report from Mr. Benyamin to the police that was described in the investigative report that she called Hannah, that Hannah was no longer her child but was a sin. And so there was a lot of evidence that she really believed that by having a child with somebody who was married, by having a child in this sort of open relationship, that it was a sin, and that she passed that sin on to her daughter, and so they shared that they were both embodiments of sin.
Okay, and you specifically indicated in your report that she believed that she needed to take her own life because of those delusions. Is that fair to say?
That was my impression, yes.
Okay.
That and everything in the world was telling her to.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just about the belief about sin, it was those delusions of reference that she was experiencing both before, during, and after, that everything was telling her that she needed to do this in her mind.
Okay, Judge, can I have one? These delusions that Ms. Driver was experiencing, do you believe that they go beyond what Mr. Joyce was trying to teach her with respect to their belief system?
I do. I mean, there were certainly things that she talked about that aligned with the things that he taught her, but there are several reasons why I don't think that the ones that were really leading up to this were actually part of that religious belief, mostly because she started questioning those religious beliefs, and then she started getting a lot of distress about it. And while the beliefs, the magical thinking parts, that she could impact the world, that may have been something that she learned from Mr. Benyamin, but the delusions of reference, those are different. Those are something else that, as far as what I've seen and what I've been told so far, is not a part of their religious beliefs, that everything's telling you you need to die is not part of it, as far as I've seen. And the other reason I don't believe that it's entirely just what she's been taught is that she was having delusions before she ever even met him. And so you take somebody who's vulnerable, who's young, who's already delusional, who's already using drugs, and you bring them in and you start teaching them this stuff. A sane, stable person might start believe it, maybe, but a person who has a personality disorder and a delusional disorder and a substance use disorder, you're teaching them something that increases those problems as opposed to decreasing those problems. So if she started out, that's sort of her baseline. And she started out as vulnerable and delusional and was only made worse by this. So while it may be consistent, that doesn't mean that's all it is.
Without her receiving any medical treatment during that period of time, and particularly the months leading up to this incident, is it fair to say that her situation would only get worse?
That would be my assumption, yes.
Yeah. This is not what you've diagnosed her with. This is not like being diagnosed with the common cold or the flu that you can.
It's not going to go away by itself, no.
Right. This takes medical treatment, in terms of pharmaceuticals, therapy, a whole host of things. Is that
All
fair
of
to
those
say?
things, yes.
And will be something that Ms. Driver has to address for the rest of her natural life.
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
It may be episodic. It can come and go. People get on medications and they do better, and they have treatment and they do better. But even with the treatment, it can still come back. And then you need to adjust your treatment. People can sort of learn to tolerate psychiatric medications just like they can learn to tolerate drugs. So you need to constantly be vigilant and aware of the things that are the early signs so that you can make changes before things get bad. And that's not really something people with schizoaffective disorder are good at.
Particularly, as you've seen in the jail records, someone that's not consistently taking her medication, right?
Right.
There were other indications that, or Ms. Driver, did she talk to you about how she was attempting, you said she was attempting to, I guess, not believe some of the following and teachings that Mr. Joyce had, but was there also indications that she was trying to leave that setting with her child?
She told me she tried to leave multiple times. She talked about one incident. She really only talked about two in particular, but one of them was an incident where she ran out in the street and tried to flag down a motorist. And the other one was when she called her parents and tried to get the parents to come pick her up and take her home to Tennessee.
Were you aware that her relationship with her parents was somewhat isolated by this group setting?
My understanding from the things that Ms. Driver told me was that she was incredibly isolated from everybody outside of the little family that they made, that she was not allowed to speak to other people unless they were trying to recruit them, that she wasn't allowed to go into stores or spend money or use a phone without being supervised. She wasn't allowed to have a job unless they really needed it. So she only had like 2 jobs in her life, and they were about like 2 weeks long or something like that. A motel, I think, like cleaning up motel rooms or something like that. I can't remember exactly. But so she was very isolated. The only people in her life were the people that the family, the group, the cult, whatever you want to call them, allowed her to be access to in her descriptions.
Did she tell you that when she would have occasions to talk with her parents, that frequently, or even all the time, that Mr. Ben Michael was there listening to her phone calls?
That they were monitored? Yes,
Yeah.
she did tell me that.
And that he would frequently monitor her text messages and communications with anybody through her phone. Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think you said it earlier, but your clinical opinion is that someone who was already in a state of paranoia and experiencing delusions prior to that type of environment, that type of living situation would likely enhance that tenfold.
Yeah, at least over time. It may at the beginning because the borderline personality disorder, she may have really liked that close control at first, but over time, without any kind of treatment and things like that for her delusions and things like that, yes. And then I think it got worse with the baby because she started to realize that maybe the baby needs something different, and started to question things. And then the CBD happened, and I think that all just sort of triggered a decompensation, is what we call it, when your symptoms get worse. That she decompensated at least starting in September of 2020, and just continued to go down and was not able to get the treatment that she needed.
As jury has heard from one witness in this case that was with Ms. Driver during the course of that time, a man named Jason Spillers. You were not privy to his testimony. You'll probably thank yourself for that in some ways. He described Ms. Driver as going in and out of basically what he called catatonic states at times.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that's consistent with someone that's dealing with schizoaffective disorders?
I think that, yeah, it could be. It's hard to say what would have caused that. She told me about one of those as well.
Okay.
She told me that, I believe it was on Hannah's birthday, that she went into a catatonic state. She said that she felt like it was more the magical thinking. She said that her brother had been shot, and that she felt like her that she somehow caused it, that it was somehow her fault, even though he was in Florida and they were up in Connecticut. And that she couldn't move, she couldn't breathe, she couldn't eat, she couldn't do things because she was afraid that it would have a catastrophic effect of some sort. She didn't have a specific thing that she said would happen, except that she was afraid she'd never be able to touch her daughter again, was one thing she mentioned. And that she did not get up until Mr. Joyce, what is
Ben
the
Michael,
Ben Michael.
Joyce. You can call him Z if you'd like.
Sort of forced her to get up. I think she said that he poured water on her, that he kicked her, that he set Hannah on her chest to try and make her get up, and that she eventually did get up, but that she was still in sort of a depressive state, and she was very unhappy about, looking like crap and going down and having pictures taken with the family and things like that. And then she also started to talk about some delusional thoughts she had about photographs and people taking photographs so that they could download you back into that point in time, and that sort of it would create. And this is something I've heard from other people as well. This is not as unusual as it might sound, but that by taking a photograph of somebody, you sort of create, I don't know, like anybody back up their hard drives and you create a picture of what happened at that time. So if anything goes wrong, you can go back to that. That's sort of what she was describing, that by taking a picture, he could then, if she died, download her back into that same spot, which she found to be very distressing.
Just one final question, Dr. Garrett. There's no, we're going to hear from Dr. Ballard later, so I don't want to put words in your mouth about what findings she made in her report, but is it fair to say that your belief that she met these DSM diagnoses as far as schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, is that consistent with what you saw in Dr. Ballard's report as well?
I believe so, but I don't remember specifically what the opinions or diagnoses Dr. Ballard made.
Is it also fair to say that experts such as yourself, particularly in the field of psychology, can have disagreements about someone's diagnosis?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just people. We do our best. We can make mistakes. We can interpret things differently. And that's not even necessarily a mistake. People interpret things differently. And then there's also a lot of gray area. So you might say, well, she doesn't have schizoaffective disorder, she's got bipolar disorder with psychotic features. It's the same factors, it's the same symptoms, just they align a little bit differently. So people may disagree on whether it's this one or that one, or whether it's an unspecified psychotic disorder because it seems a little different than your normal psychotic disorder, which could be impacted by lifestyle and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of there's gray area, there's a lot of room for different ways of interpreting, different ways of seeing evidence, and everything has to come from a human as well. So we get our information, and this driver is a human. The people at the jail who took down notes about what she did are humans. Everybody makes mistakes, everybody interprets things through their own lens. So yes, there is room for disagreement.
But your final conclusion is that she definitely suffered from these disorders that you have diagnosed her with, and was...
I am confident that she was experiencing delusions. I'm confident that those delusions included paranoia, delusions of reference, and magical thinking. She also reported auditory and visual hallucinations. She also described and exhibited both depressive mood and sort of hypomanic manic mood that I was able to see both sides of that coin. So yes, there may be different ways of arriving at what the actual name of the diagnosis is, but I am confident in the symptoms that I observed and documented.
Okay. Thank you very much, ma'am.
All right, we're going to take a recess before cross-examination, and I'm going to let you be in recess for 15 minutes. That'll be back in the jury room at 5 till 11. Leave us your notepads. Don't talk about the case. You can step outside if you'd. All right, cross-examination.
Good morning. Dr. Garrett, what percentage of the population has a mental health disorder?
Oh, I don't know. Do not know the answer to that question.
Okay. Is some type of mental health diagnosis pervasive in our society?
Yeah, because the diagnoses range from very mild to extreme. So yeah, we all have symptoms and things that bug us
Okay.
that could fall into a category.
All right. And you'd agree that having a mental health diagnosis is not the same question as whether somebody is criminally responsible, correct?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay. And somebody can have schizoaffective disorder and still be criminally responsible.
They can?
And somebody can have borderline personality disorder and still be criminally responsible.
They can?
And somebody can have cannabis use disorder and still be held criminally responsible.
Yes?
Okay. I want to talk to you specifically, I'll go back sort of to the beginning. You talked about how one of the things you diagnosed her with was cannabis use disorder. And in your report, isn't it true that you indicated that Ms. Driver told you that she believed that that CBD had high levels of THC in it?
Yes, she told me that.
Okay. And when you were testifying about the reasons for your diagnosing her with cannabis use disorder, you talked about the intoxicating effects of THC, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And so in making that diagnosis, are you assuming that there was THC in that substance?
Yes.
Okay. And so if you learned that when she went to the hospital on December the 8th, she was tested and she tested negative for THC and the substance was tested and only tested positive for CBD, would that change your diagnosis?
Yes.
Okay.
It would change that one diagnosis, not the others.
Okay. And you also put in your report that Ms. Driver represented to you that her use of CBD was involuntary, correct?
That she said that she wanted to use CBD oil that she purchased online, but she wasn't allowed to, so she was given the CBD oil that was brought in by a friend. She didn't know its source, but that after a while it was not helping her and she felt like she felt worse, but she was then required to keep taking it.
Okay. Are you aware that Ms. Driver was evaluated by 3 different doctors in this case? Dr. Ballard first, then you, then a Dr. Zahn?
I heard about the third evaluator recently, but I've never seen a report or any information about that.
Okay. Were you aware that she told Dr. Zahn when asked about the CBD that it was still in her bag, but she doesn't even remember if she was still taking it?
I'm going to object. She just said she doesn't know anything about Dr. Zahn's report.
I was never given the report. I've never been told what was in the report.
Sustain the objection.
All right.
Let's do the question too, since you read the report into the record.
I'll rephrase my question.
All right, I'll strike that question and you can
I'll
move on.
rephrase it. If she told Dr. Zom that the CBD was still in her bag, but she doesn't even remember if she was still using it, would that be inconsistent with what she told you?
It would be inconsistent to the extent of whether she remembers it or not. That doesn't necessarily mean she didn't take it.
Okay. Now, you indicated that, I think your language was that you became aware of the fact that she was still communicating with Benjamin Ben Michael after your evaluation. Is that right?
I heard something about her accessing text messages or some sort of communication device from within the jail.
Okay. But you spent over 4 hours with her on August the 11th of 2022 and September the 2nd of 2022?
Yes.
And she told you all kinds of things about her relationship with Benjamin Ben Michael and how abusive and oppressive it was, right?
She gave me a lot of information.
Did she ever tell you in your 4 hours together that she was still actively communicating with him on hundreds of jail phone calls?
She did not.
Okay. And as part of your forensic evaluation process, is it typical for the evaluators to tell the defendant what the possible options and outcomes are for each? For example, would you explain to her the concept of not guilty by reason of insanity and what would have to be found in order for her to avail herself of that defense?
Yes,
Okay, and that's typical, right? To
It is.
Explain that to them?
it is.
Okay, so she would have known from the jump what would have to be proven for her to establish that defense.
Not from the jump.
Okay.
That's not the first thing you tell them. I went through the entirety of her background. I already had gathered all of her mental health symptoms before we even talked about any plea options. So she had already given me her background information, what she had experienced during childhood, what she experienced in terms of her drug use history, what she had experienced with the cult, what she called the cult. And it wasn't until the competency evaluation when we talked that when we went through all the different plea options and what their meaning and consequences are, that was the first time I gave her any information about what the not guilty by reason of insanity plea means.
And when it comes to people in your type of position that do these types of evaluations, is it common to explain what not guilty by reason of insanity means?
Yes, we've got to make sure that the part of the competency evaluation is to make sure they understand what the different options are and what their potential consequences are.
Okay,
So yes, we go through each one of the pleas.
all right. And she had already met and been evaluated by another doctor, Dr. Ballard, prior to you seeing her, right?
I believe so.
Okay, and do you know what Dr. Ballard discussed with her about what had to be established for the insanity defense?
I do not know what her proceedings are. I don't know when or where or how she might have covered that topic. I'm sure she would have covered that topic, but I don't know if it was the first thing or the last thing.
Okay. And you indicated in your report that when you met with her, let me get your language here. You found her to be able to maintain a reality-based conversation, and the statements that she made during the interview were logical, coherent, and relevant.
At the time of the evaluation.
Okay, so when you met with her, she was stable on her medication, and you didn't have any concerns about her being able to...
The first time she was mildly hypomanic, but yes, she was generally stable. The second time she was depressive, but she was not actively hallucinating.
Okay. And you indicated that she relayed to you that the relationship and the status of the sort of polygamist lifestyle was positive?
I didn't ask her about that.
Okay.
She relayed to me that she joined the group, that other people joined, and that at the end she was questioning things. But we didn't talk in any depth about how she felt about the relationship in the early years, the sort of the honeymoon years. We didn't talk about that.
All right. Well, did you talk about how she felt about those relationships in the later stages?
She didn't talk about the sister wives at all. I don't know why I used sister wives, because that show, I guess.
Okay.
But the other wives, she didn't. She talked about them existing, but she didn't say good or bad things about them.
So when she met with you, she expressed complete indifference about all the other people in the group and her lifestyle.
Yeah, she just described it. She didn't say whether she had thoughts or feelings about it.
Okay. And are you aware that she told Dr. Ballard, who evaluated her, that she initially didn't mind having multiple women and that it made sense to her, but the reality of it was very toxic and stressful and very hard for all of them to get along?
I don't have a specific memory about that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. And are you aware that she reported to Dr. Ballard that there were frequent arguments, sharing an RV with Mr. Joyce and the other wife, and then a third woman joined, which added to the conflict?
I don't have any recollection
Okay.
of that.
That would be inconsistent with what she told you?
Not particularly, because I didn't ask her.
Okay. So you did not inquire about sort of the dynamics of the group on December the 8th of 2020?
I talked about what she was experiencing and feeling. I didn't ask her about other people.
Okay. So you didn't get information about Jason Spillers or Jessica Kafijian?
I knew that they were there.
Okay. But in terms of her thoughts about that relationship and how that related to her decisions to commit the act, you didn't get into that at all?
Those were not the basis for what she told me was why she behaved the way she behaved.
Okay. But one of the things that you were capable of reviewing in this case and had was her handwritten notes from December the 9th of 2020, the day after she killed Hannah, right?
I did have those.
Okay.
Or at least I had some. I don't know if I had the totality.
All right. So in terms of her very first statements about why she killed Hannah, are you aware that she said, "I was going insane and no longer wanted to be with his friends, but kept coming back for him"?
I don't have a specific memory of that, but I may have had that piece of information.
Okay. Are you aware that in her first statements about why she killed Hannah, she said, "I only wanted my baby and husband, but he refused"?
I don't remember that.
Okay. You'd agree that her own statements the day after she killed Hannah about what motivated her act would be highly relevant to her state of mind the day before?
It would be relevant, not necessarily dispositive, since she was medicated and in trauma,
Okay.
but it would certainly be relevant.
All right. So your evaluation of her was taking place in 2022, and these statements she was making to law enforcement was the day after. Can we agree on
So
that?
it would definitely improve her memory.
Okay.
The record, she made those statements at the hospital not too long.
I'm sorry. She made them to law enforcement at the hospital. And did you, in reviewing and reaching your conclusions about this case, review all of these handwritten notes that she
I
provided?
reviewed
to
the
law
ones that I
enforcement?
had.
Okay. Can I approach and show you and see if you recognize them?
Sure. I don't recall this one.
Okay. And in your report, Mhm. In your report, you indicate that one of the things you received were the Kennestone Hospital handwritten notes of Chloe Driver, correct?
Yeah, they actually said Kennestone Hospital on the top, and that one didn't, so I'm not sure. If I can look at my notes, I might have a copy of the ones that I actually
Okay.
reviewed, if that's okay.
Are you, I can approach. Is this what you're referring to?
I think the other records that Mrs. Driver had.
Those are the ones that I had.
Cruises notes, not the Kennestone Hospital.
These are the ones that you
Those
have?
are the ones that I have.
All right. So you would have known in your evaluation of her that Ms. Driver told the psychiatrist at Kennestone Hospital, I was stating for months I couldn't handle my husband's lifestyle anymore.
I would have had it. I don't specifically remember everything that she wrote. There's a lot of information in this
Okay.
case, I'm afraid.
And you would have known that she wrote to the psychiatrist for the first 2 years, not so much because it was just us traveling, but then once he got people listening to him more, I started feeling scared and was begging for attention for us to be with the baby.
I don't remember that one either.
Okay, so these statements about her begging for attention, her not liking his lifestyle, these statements that she made close in time to the crime, you did not factor those into your determination about what her...
There were certain ones that I remember reviewing, saying that she felt, can I reflect? I can't remember whether you, I don't think I got an answer on whether I could review the notes that I had to reflect
Sure,
my
of course.
recollection.
You can't read them, but you can refresh your recollection of them.
Let me just see if I have them here.
You can read it, you can't read
I
it.
can't read them aloud. I hear ya. This is the one thing. Okay, yes, I did review that.
You did review what?
The document you just read.
Okay. And are you aware that she made statements that to law enforcement the day after she killed Hannah that stated, I just wanted to have a normal life with Nimsy?
I don't have a specific recollection. It wouldn't surprise me, though.
Okay. And would statements about wanting to have a normal life with her baby, wanting to be with just her husband and her baby, and wanting to be away from the cult, would those things be delusional?
No?
Okay. Those would be rational, right?
I believe so, but they could be influenced by her mental health condition, but yes.
Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about Ms. Driver's statements in evaluations and in the investigation of this case that are relevant to her ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Are you aware that one of her first inquiries while in the hospital was, how long will my prison sentence be for killing her?
I have heard that.
Okay. And from a psychological standpoint, let me rephrase my question. Is that consistent with her statements to you about her ability to distinguish between right and wrong?
It certainly reflects an ability to distinguish between what's legal and not legal.
Okay.
There's a little bit more gray area when you talk about right and wrong on a more ethical, moral appropriateness level.
Okay, but we're talking about the law. So would you agree with me that she has expressly made statements that she understood what she was doing to Hannah was wrong.
She did state to me that she knew that it was wrong, but she also stated, I was at peace because it's how it's supposed to be. So this, again, both sides of that coin. Yes, she appeared to understand a legal wrongfulness, but there is some question about the moral and appropriateness in her
Okay.
mind.
And you said you had Dr. Ballard's report when you did your evaluation. Are you aware that she told Dr. Ballard, as soon as it happened, I regretted it. I thought I shouldn't have done this. This was not supposed to happen.
I said before, I didn't read her report all that carefully. I did review her report, but I don't remember the specific things that she said. But a statement like that after the fact also would not surprise me.
Okay. So you'd agree that the best historian of whether she understood the difference between right and wrong would be her, correct?
Maybe.
Okay. And when she was expressly asked if she thought her behavior was wrong, she said yes.
That wouldn't surprise me.
Okay. And in being evaluated by Dr. Ballard, are you aware that when she was discussing whether she knew her actions were wrong, she also volunteered that she locked the door so that she could also stab herself in the throat and make sure that she died?
Yes, I'm aware that she had locked the door to try and kill both herself and her daughter.
Okay. And are you aware that those were statements made by Miss Driver in response to whether she understood what she was doing was wrong?
Yes,
Okay.
based on her report.
Right. Well, and you're relying heavily on her report for your testimony about her delusions.
And based on the
correct?
other psychologist report.
Understood, not Ms. Driver's report? Okay,
Yes, I did rely a lot on Ms. Driver's report.
okay. And with regard to your inquiry with her about whether she understood what she was doing to her daughter was wrong, isn't it true that she told you that she apologized to her daughter before she repeatedly stabbed her in the neck?
She did say that she apologized.
And I want to talk to you about her statements to you surrounding the actual event. You'd agree with me that the pertinent question for purposes of criminal responsibility are state of mind at the time she committed the act,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So the testimony you just provided to the jury was from childhood to arrest, correct?
Yes, throughout the whole course of her life. Yeah.
All right, so I want to talk about December the 8th when she's in the room with Hannah,
Okay.
okay? What information did she provide to you about what she was doing in the room with Hannah just prior to her killing her?
She indicated that she had come from the 12 tribes meeting where she had believed that they were talking about death to give her a specific message that now was the time to do this thing that she'd been getting messages about to kill herself and her daughter. And that they got to the location, and that when she went to go join the other two wives in one room, that Mr. Joyce snapped at her and said, no, go to, she called it Brett's room. I believe Brett was somebody who previously lived there or previously traveled with them. So she told me that she interpreted that instruction as an instruction that she should kill herself and her daughter. She indicated that she was trying to do some research on her phone about how to get away, how to escape and move money and things like that. And that she went to try and change her daughter's diaper and didn't have a diaper and asked for one to be brought to her, and somebody threw her a dirty shirt instead, and that she interpreted that giving her a dirty shirt instead of a diaper as a statement to her that she's not worthy of this world and she needs to leave this world. She's not even worth a clean shirt, and that therefore she should kill herself. And so that's when she said she did it.
Okay. And she told you, and you put in your report, that she was alone with Hannah in the room and she was doing research on her phone about bankruptcy and how to get away with her daughter.
Yes.
Okay. And you're aware that she had a phone with her in that room based on her statements to you and based on your review of the police report, right?
Right, she said she was doing research on her phone.
Okay. And you also put in your report that she didn't have any access to money. Is that right?
She had told me that part of the deal with joining this was that every woman who joined the group had to turn over all of their funds and put into a joint account to make it more spiritually strong. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but that everybody had to donate all of their money to this account, and that they were not allowed to use it without express permission or access it without express permission.
Okay. And are you aware that she had $1,000 cash in her bag with her phone and the baby's effects?
I did not know that.
Okay. Are you aware that she told Dr. Zom, who evaluated her, that when she left her parents' house, she
Judge,
put...
I'm going to object again. We've already been down this road about what Dr. Zom's report says. She never got it.
I'll rephrase it.
All right.
If she told...
No.
If she told somebody else that she put $1,000 cash in her bag before she went back with Benjamin, would that be inconsistent with her statement to you that she didn't have any access to money?
Not exactly. And let me explain, because I know you're looking at me like I'm crazy. But she had talked about in the time when she went to try and get her mother, of trying to put together some money, trying to access some money, trying to move money towards her parents. So there was some indication already that she was trying to move money around, trying to save up, trying to do something that would help her escape with her daughter. So I didn't specifically ask her whether she had access on that day, so I couldn't say that it was inconsistent with her financial situation on the day.
But she represented to you that she didn't have any access to funds, right?
Overall, over the course of the relationship, that's what she said.
Okay. And you were not aware that she had $1,000 cash in her bag?
I was not.
Debit cards in her name, were you aware of that?
I did not know. I didn't.
Blank checks that related to an account that had $65,000 in it?
I have no information about that.
Okay. With regard to the actual event, we talked about her telling you that she knew it was wrong, and her statements to Dr. Ballard that she knew it was wrong and immediately regretted it. And we talked about her statements about locking the door to make sure she could accomplish the acts. I want to talk about the specific trigger that caused her to kill Hannah. Find my report. Did she tell you that Benjamin throwing her the dirty shirt for Hannah was the last thing that triggered her, that nobody wanted her or Hannah to be here?
I believe that was the last trigger, yeah.
Okay, so she needs a clean shirt for the baby. She tells you he throws her a shirt up to the window. He's in the driveway and tosses her a shirt up to the window, and it's dirty.
That's my recollection.
Okay, and she indicated that was the trigger that told her nobody that wanted her or the baby to be there.
That, on top of 3 months of seeing signs and symbols of those things, it was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, I guess.
Okay, but on the 8th, in terms of her state of mind, on the 8th when she committed the act, that is what she relayed was her trigger for committing the act, correct?
That's what she relayed was the last thing that happened before she triggered the act. I mean, nobody can be parsed into one moment in time. Everybody's life builds upon itself. So if 3 months of seeing everything as being a sign that she's supposed to kill herself, the fact that it was a shirt that finally tipped it over, the last thing that happened, doesn't mean that's the trigger. It's the last thing, the final thing.
Right, but if this jury is going to evaluate what her state of mind was at the time of the crime, you'd agree that her state of mind closest in time of the crime was what was happening in that room with Hannah on that day?
Not really, because like I said, we're not just a moment in time. My sitting here in this chair, speaking to all of you, and having butterflies in my stomach and, anxiety is not just because I'm sitting here right now. It's because I've sat here before. It's because I've sat there before. It's because I've experienced it before. And all those experiences lead up to how we interpret events. And unfortunately, in this driver's case, all of those experiences were, you shouldn't be here, you're bad, you're going to be punished, the world is going to end, and you and your daughter are sinful and you need to not be here anymore. And every single new thing is not a separate thing, it's an additional thing. It's adding a weight on top of a weight, on top of a weight, on top of a weight, until the bench finally crashes.
How much information did she give you about exactly how she killed Hannah? Was her memory intact? Did she have any problems giving you the play-by-play?
She basically said it was fuzzy. She remembered that she had done it. She remembered that she had harmed herself and harmed her baby, but that was, I didn't get a, first I stabbed her and then I stabbed her there and then we didn't do that.
Did you ask her?
I asked her what happened and she told me what she could remember as far as I could tell, but I did not try and get a blow by blow because that's not necessarily relevant to my question.
Her memory of the event is not relevant to her mental state at the time she committed
She
the crime?
remembered it happened. Her memory of the specific identified details is not, it could have changed over time. I asked her to tell me as much as she could remember. She told me what she told me. It was relatively vague, but I did not get I moved my arm this way, I moved my arm that way, I moved that arm the other way.
Okay. Did she report to you that her memory was vague?
She just gave me a vague report. I don't remember what she said about about the quality of her memory.
Okay. And I want to talk to you a little bit about what specifically vague means, because obviously her mental state during the commission of the crime, what she did, what she remembers, is relevant to whether she understood the difference between right and wrong and what motivated her actions. So let's break it down. Did she tell you that she went downstairs and grabbed a knife from the knife block in Gerald Aglin's kitchen?
She did not.
She did not tell you that. Okay. Did she tell you that she didn't even look at the knife? She just walked up the stairs, looked down, and closed the door and locked it?
She did not.
Okay. Did she tell you that she was scared that somebody would come into the room if she didn't lock the door?
She did not.
Did she tell you that she played a lot of video games and she knew that if you stabbed someone in video games, they die immediately?
She did not.
All right. Did she tell you that she fed Hannah, breastfed Hannah, and then laid her down on the bed?
She did not.
Did she tell you that at that time Hannah was happy?
She did not.
Okay. Did she tell you that she laid her down and stabbed her in the throat?
She did not.
Did she tell you that she stabbed her once, but she wasn't dead, she was just quiet and bleeding out?
She told me that she stabbed her.
Okay. Did she tell you after she stabbed Hannah once, she stabbed herself in the throat 3 times?
She told me that she stabbed herself.
Okay. Did she tell you that at that moment she was standing there wondering why they weren't dying?
I don't remember that.
Did she tell you that she was confused at that moment because they were supposed to die immediately?
No.
She did not?
No. I don't have no recollection of her saying that.
All right. And did she tell you after she was confused about why they weren't dying immediately, she went back over to Hannah and stabbed her in the neck again?
She did not.
And did she tell you that when Benjamin broke through the door, that's when she tried to stab herself in the heart in her chest?
I know that she did subsequently stab herself in the chest after stabbing herself in the throat, but the specific timing of it, I don't recall.
Okay. And if she had made those statements to another doctor in this case, would you agree that her memory was substantially intact?
Sounds like it.
Okay. And you didn't inquire about those details, or she didn't give them?
I didn't specifically inquire about the blow-by-blow. I talked to her about what thoughts and feelings and experiences that she was having leading up to and during the event.
Okay. All right, we talked a lot about her delusions, and you indicated that just because you have a delusion or a delusion disorder doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be held criminally responsible, right?
You have a delusion that the sky is really purple, and that doesn't mean that you needed to go and shop with a 6-pack of beer, so no.
Okay. So I want to talk to you specifically about I'm going to try to do a modern day flip chart here, so bear with me. We will complete this together. All right, can you see this on your screen? Can you turn on the screen, Yorna?
It's on.
Okay.
Just warming up.
All right. All right. I want to talk about what delusions she indicated she was suffering from on December the 8th of 2020. And I want you to tell me what they are, specifically what the particular delusion was, and whether that related more to her general worldview or whether that related to Hannah and the acts that she committed against Hannah.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay?
But you're presuming that a person who's mentally ill has got something that's this easily definable. There's a lot more mud in this water than a box over here and a box over there. So I will do my best, but
Well, you have used the broad term, she suffered from delusions. And this jury is going to have to make findings about what particular delusions and how those related to the act.
Okay.
So I need you to try in terms of your professional capacity and in terms of the information you collected and what Ms. Driver specifically reported, because whether she had a delusion is not the issue. The issue is what the particular delusion was.
I understand.
So if you could tell me what the particular delusion was, and on December the 8th of 2020, I don't need to talk about her delusions from childhood, what her delusions were on December the 8th of 2020, and whether those related to and were connected to the act of murdering Hannah, or whether those were more worldview delusions.
Okay. She had delusions of reference
Okay?
that don't appear to be related in any way to their worldview or religion. So I would put it under the particular delusion connected to the act.
And what delusions are you discussing?
Those are the delusions that everything in the world was telling her that she needed to kill herself and her daughter. That's how she was interpreting things that people said, things that people did, objects in the environment.
Okay, so just a general, everything was telling her to do it.
Well, she had specific things that she mentioned. She mentioned the people at the 12 tribes talking about accepting death.
Okay.
And that she interpreted that as being a specific sign that not only was she supposed to do that, but that this was the time. I believe she said something along the lines of, she was like, oh, yeah, okay, that's it then, this is the time.
Okay?
So people talking about death, seeing knives in her vicinity. She had been talking about that both before and during the event. She talked about, those were the two biggest ones. She talked about a whole bunch of other things, odd beliefs about the world that may have been things that her husband taught her. I don't really know much about his belief system that he's set up.
Mm-hmm.
She talked about there being only 169,000 people in the world, and that everybody else is a demon-controlled robot or something like that.
Can we talk for a minute about the difference between a delusion and a bizarre belief?
Mm-hmm.
You use the word conspiracy on direct. There's a difference between like a delusion and like a conspiracy theory. So when you're having like a group mentality, like a cult, and they all subscribed to like a particular set of beliefs, and you're not just evaluating one person's mental state, but a collective belief, that doesn't necessarily have to be a delusion, even if it's a fixed belief that is seemingly completely disconnected from reality.
Generally speaking, but if you take a set of instructions and a set of circumstances in which the only information that a person who already is delusional, and give them that information, just because it's consistent with the information doesn't mean that it's not playing on her delusions, increasing her delusions. She already had delusions that were paranoid, that people were out to get her. So when you add on top of that instruction that is firmly rooted in this guy's power and ability to say, your paranoia is correct. The paranoia you already have is accurate. Your parents are working with the CIA. They're out to get you. Everybody's out to get you. That does not help a pre-existing delusional situation. So yes, it could just be a firmly held world belief, a religious belief. Certainly some people don't believe other religions and think that's weird that people believe the things that they believe. But in this particular case, you're talking about a woman who was already damaged. She was already delusional. And you pile more false information on top of that, and you can exacerbate that existing delusional set. And so you can make delusions worse. You're more likely to believe the information that's given to you if you're already delusional, if you're already paranoid, and they say, oh, yeah, but you're not paranoid. The CIA is really after you. You start to believe that, and if that's all you hear, if that's everything that's everybody around you, and that's how cults work generally, I'll give you that. That's how religious movements work. That's how all of those conspiracy theories work. But the problem is that in Chloe Driver's case, there's clear evidence, well, not clear evidence, self-report, which is supported by other information, that she already had delusional beliefs and she was already susceptible to that. So they were just made worse by this situation. So while that may be a firmly held religious belief, it's also possible that it's delusional in her case, because not every sovereign citizen is crazy, but some sovereign citizens are crazy in the vernacular.
Sure, and crazy and criminally insane are not the same
Not
thing.
the same thing, I know,
Right.
I understand.
And crazy and subject to criminal responsibility are not the same thing.
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to go back to this. With regard to her thought process on December the 8th of 2020, based on her self-report, your evaluation, your review of the file, were there any other particular delusions, and what were they, that were connected to her act of murdering Hannah?
The other one that I would say would be the magical thinking that she experienced. And that is also related to the religion that she was being taught, that she was being fed on a daily basis. But she was being told that she had the capacity, the ability to change the world, cause pain or solve pain, cause a catastrophe or save the world from a catastrophe. And she already had magical thinking before this. She had beliefs that she could read minds. There was all other things going on with her before all this happened. So if you put this in there, and she also had an experience of having been punished for not stopping the pain, not correcting whatever she did wrong. She talked about having walked the wrong way and been told she had to do a weird dance or walk backwards to make it right. That she had this power to make it right, and also the power to make it wrong. Another time she talked about being punished for not putting out the right energy by being forced to stay in bed for 24 hours, not allowed to use the restroom. She urinated on herself, that kind of thing. She talked another time about when she was pregnant, she was put into an RV with or a trailer of some sort with all the windows blocked, and the room was completely dark. And that while she was in there, she was terrified, that she was screaming, that she was seeing things, that it really messed her up. And
was that a delusion on December the 8th of 2020 that related to the act of Hannah Driver?
so I'm getting there.
Okay.
So the ideas of reference, the magical thinking, this belief that not only can she affect the world, but she must affect the world, or else she's going to get punished. That's not necessarily delusional. The punishment's not necessarily delusional, but the belief that she could actually change the world is delusional. And then you add that to her belief that she was sinning, that her daughter was sin, that both of them were being told that they were not right, that they were not supposed to be there, that they needed to be gone. That combination of symptoms was all at play at the time that she committed this act.
And
Based on
she
her.
made statements that she believed she was sinning because she was married to a man with more than one wife. She had a baby with a man that was married to someone else, correct?
Those were some things that were included in, I think, her searches on her internet.
Okay. And the statements she made about Hannah were that she felt like she was passing her sins on to Hannah when she breastfed her, right?
That's correct. And she talked about downloading her sin and pouring her sin. It was sort of like a generational sin kind of thing.
All right. And as it relates to what her particular delusions were on December the 8th of 2020 that related to the act of why she murdered Hannah, can you think of any other specifics that we can put on this list?
Those were the ones that really stood out to me. I'm sure there were other thought processes involved, but those are the ones that I really remember.
Okay. Did she ever indicate at any point in any material that you have reviewed that she was afraid of Hannah?
No.
Did she ever indicate that she thought Hannah was a threat to her?
No.
Did she ever indicate that she felt like she had to defend herself against Hannah?
No.
I have nothing further.
Redirect.
Yes, Judge, just briefly. Can I leave that up?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So, I just want to clarify, as Ms. Cropper was asking you questions, she was typing in here that the save or harm the world, walking the wrong way, having the right to walk backwards to make it right. You actually described those as applying to the delusional aspect of Ms. Driver, correct?
I think it's probably both. It's one of those ones that maybe you should have a over the line kind of thing, because she was experiencing those thoughts at the time, according to the way she described it all to me. And it is relevant to how I thought about what happened, because there was an element of I could be punished and I could experience bad things. I could cause harm to other people if I don't follow the instructions that everything is telling me that I need to kill myself and my child.
Sorry, I'm a horrible typer, apparently. And I can't spell. Goodness. Okay, so maybe they apply in both categories.
I mean, these things kind of bleed together when you're talking about somebody who's got a mental illness and is fed odd beliefs.
Now, Dr. Garrett, to be clear, you do not believe that Ms. Driver was suffering, even though she was suffering from a mental illness, she was not in a 24-hour, 7-day state of delusion. Is that fair?
Nobody really is. Symptoms come and go. They fluctuate. They can be episodic. They can have periods of time where they're really bad and they might get better for a while and then get bad again.
There are specific things that would trigger her particular delusions that she was experiencing, as you've described it.
That's the way it seemed, and things would happen in the world that she would interpret as being directed specifically at her, and that would trigger distress.
When she's interviewed after she's arrested, whether in the hospital or at the jail by law enforcement, or rather interviewed at the hospital by medical staff or by law enforcement, you would agree with me at that point in time was not the same day as the day of this incident, right?
At a minimum, I believe it had to have been the next day. She was in procedures and sedated the first day according to the psychiatric intake.
Were you aware at the hospital that she was provided fentanyl when she first got to the hospital?
I did see that they gave her a lot of medications to help treat her pain and calm her down.
Those medications could help her calm down and return to, I think, what kind of you described as more of a sane state. Is that fair?
Yes.
It is fair to say that anyone in a sane state.
I'm going to object to the leading nature of his questions. This is his witness.
Does someone in a sane state understand the difference between right and wrong?
Typically.
Does
What somebody thinks when they're doing well versus when they are in distress. I mean, even take out psychosis. If you're in real distress, you're stressed, you're traumatized, you're scared, your memory is different, your way of interpreting the world is different. People who have a traumatic experience may block it out for a period of time and then it may come back. Even some of the statements that were made to the police in the investigative summary talked about how she wouldn't even really remember she would snap and lose all sense of herself, and then would apologize afterwards, and she didn't even know it had happened. So there is, once you come out of that state, you can look back on something, hindsight's 20/20 for all of us, and say, oh, that was wrong, that was bad. But at the time, maybe not, who knows?
How would you expect someone that is sane to react when being told that they've killed their daughter?
Distraught.
Would they express
Scared.
remorse?
I'm sure they would. I would.
Are you aware that Ms. Driver did?
Yes.
Ms. Gropper asked you about explaining the NGRI findings and conditions in order to make that a defense in court. You discussed that with her, correct?
Yes.
that was discussed with her after you had already talked to her about all of her mental health background, her background with pre-Ben Michael, with Ben Michael, leading up to December.
I always get mental health history before I tell to anybody about the NGRI or any of the other defenses or plea options, because I don't want them to change their answers based on what the criteria is for.
Did you have any reason to believe that she was telling you these things in order to fit this narrative of an NGRI defense?
I'm sure there was some element of that, but not the driving force. I mean, there's always some element of that, that she believes that she knew she was getting an evaluation for that purpose. So I'm sure there was some element of that. But all of her statements were consistent over time, consistent to me, consistent to other people, and consistent with what other people said about her. And so there was a lot of evidence that the symptoms she talked to me about were things that existed before, during, and after the alleged crime.
In your statement about the trigger of the incident that day, about the clean shirt and her not feeling worthy of a clean shirt, you're not saying that that is the specific thing that made her do it. Really, it's a combination of things she experienced over the months leading up to that day,
Yes.
including the 12 tribes that morning, including the treatment through this religious cult group aspect, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, wait, hang on. But see, the receiving of that shirt, the dirty shirt, I think you actually expressed it in your report, that was an indication that she was not worthy of life, and that's why she took the action she did.
That was the last thing that happened before, according to what she told me.
And that is an example of the delusions that you are describing that she was suffering from.
Yeah, that's a sample of the delusions of reference, interpreting innocuous events as having special meaning.
Okay, thank you.
Are you familiar with the concept of a murder-suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And just because somebody wants to kill themselves doesn't make it not a murder, correct?
Correct?
Someone can want to die and still be criminally responsible.
Yes.
Okay. Did you say a moment ago to Mr. Kessler that Ms. Driver did not express any remorse for her crimes?
I did not say that.
Okay. He said a sane person would have remorse, was his question to you?
Well, yeah, he did ask that, but then he said, are you aware that she expressed remorse? And I said, yes.
That she did express remorse?
Yes.
Right. And in the hospital, she in fact wrote, "I'm sorry I killed her," right?
I understand that.
Okay. I have nothing further.
Any further questions of this witness, Mr. Kessler?
No, ma'am.
All right, any reason to keep this witness?
No.
All right, thank you, ma'am. You may be excused. Members of the jury, we are going to conclude today's proceedings at this time. We're going to let you have the afternoon off. Please leave us your notepad